We have a bombshell twist and a mystery unfolding at this mansion in Texas.
You're going to have 4 kids hospitalized on Nyquil, multiple bottles on scene.
Just a day after law enforcement said they rescued 3 kids from a pond after a mom allegedly drugged them with Nyquil in an alleged effort to potentially kill them, something we were not expecting. The father of the children, who deputies say called 911 and allegedly helped rescue the kids from the water, is now facing a charge. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Law enforcement in Liberty County, Texas, which is more than an hour's drive from Houston, have called this story bizarre, and they also say what they witnessed on scene was, quote, breathtaking. And those are 2 words that only add to the mystery that is unfolding here. The newest wrinkle to this story is this mugshot of Domingo Quintana. He's 61 years old, and he's the one who called 911 on Monday and told law enforcement that they needed to come fast. Domingo allegedly told police that his wife, who's 39 years old, drugged their children with Nyquil and tried to drown them, and then herself in a pond on their property outside their home. Now, take a look at this home. It is reportedly worth more than $3 million. It's a massive mansion on a big property in Liberty County, Texas, northeast of Houston. Deputies say that Quintana's family bought the property and then built this mansion on it, and they started living there in 2017. It has a massive gate at the entrance, and it reads Rancho Monte Carmelo. Now, I'll tell you what Quintana is now facing in just a moment, but here's what police say they found when they responded to this house early in the morning on Monday. This is per Fox 26 in Houston.
The father is the one that called 911 to report the incident. He stated he heard some commotion in the front yard, possibly yelling from the kids. The father comes outside, calls 911, and it's our belief that the father is the one that pulled some of the kids out of the water.
Deputies say that Quintana's wife, who he said allegedly tried to harm the kids, and his 11-year-old child are both in the hospital in critical condition. 2 other children were taken to the hospital and they're in stable condition. Those children, 15 years old and 6 years old. Right now, law enforcement say they're working on getting interviews with the children to learn more about exactly what might have happened. Deputies say it was Quintana helping the children out of the water when deputies got on scene, but the mom was still in the water and deputies had to pull her out.
I believe it was the dad that was helping get anybody that was in the water out of the water. Upon the deputies arriving, the kids were wet, the dad was wet, and the mother was still in the water. And the deputies are the ones, I believe, that got in and got the mother out of the water.
So right now, focused on the mom as the suspect or perpetrator?
So right now we don't have a specific focus on the mom or the dad. We're looking at both.
Now, it's important to note that deputies said that Quintana was cooperative in going to the police station, and they felt he was cooperative in answering their questions. It did catch our attention a bit, though, when law enforcement said they were looking at both Quintana and his wife. And they also said that they were told Quintana, as a living, sold cars, but they couldn't verify that. It's always interesting when law enforcement will publicly say those things. It's also unclear why the mom was still in the water when first responders arrived and Quintana had pulled out the 3 children. Now, here is the bombshell information that dropped last night. The mugshot of Quintana in the Liberty County Jail. The 61-year-old was arrested and charged with animal cruelty. This is unrelated to what allegedly took place at the pond with the children and his wife. Before we get back to this episode of On the Case, which is one of the most watched shows on all of YouTube, I need to take a moment and talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan. This is America's largest injury law firm. They have more than 1,000 attorneys and they win a lot. They've recovered more than $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. And in the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million, which was 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Then another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. Now, even if you don't think your case is worth millions of dollars, why not fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so easy to start a claim. You can do it with just 8 clicks on your phone. So if you have been hurt and you need to start a claim, go to www.forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also scan this QR code on your screen or click the link below. ABC 13 in Houston has the charging documents that say when investigators were going through the property, they found an emaciated cat. Authorities say that cat was locked in a shop building on the property. It didn't have air conditioning. And they also say there was a bowl with no food or water available. Now, that charge that Domingo Quintana is facing is reportedly a misdemeanor. Deputies say they have had to respond to the property in the past, potentially for an assault, but it was unclear who was involved in that. Child Protective Services are now involved in this case, but it's not believed they have had contact in the past with this family. Law enforcement have not released the name of Quintana's wife or the children involved, but before Quintana was arrested, there were several reporters that asked about financial struggles that this family may be having and what their financial situation was and whether they could confirm that this family was having issues. Now, law enforcement would not confirm that publicly, but we did find some court documents that may be why people are raising that question. This was a judgment from January of this year after Domingo Quintana, that's his middle name, was sued in 2023 in Harris County. That is where Houston is. And it was in the category of debt, contract fraud, or misrepresentation. Now, we don't have the documents that are laying out the case against Quintana, but the court ruled in the favor of the plaintiff, and according to this document, Quintana was on the hook for more than $138,000. Now, we also found an active case in Liberty County where the county seems to be suing Quintana and accusing him of not paying taxes for years on a 72-acre property that he has in the county. The suit claims he owes more than $43,000. Now, it is unclear if any of this plays into what allegedly happened on Quintana's property this week, but with so few pieces of information, it does help us piece together the puzzle of people potentially involved. Deputies have said there's no known mental health issues for Quintana or his wife, and court records show that Quintana was given a $5,000 bond in the animal cruelty case after he appeared in front of a judge Wednesday morning. Join us now to talk more about this is Police Sergeant Kyle Schoberg, who is the co-host of the Shots Fired podcast. Thank you for taking the time to be with us, and there's still so much we don't know in this story. But you have the dad in this case, and he's the one who called 911. I think of the story he's telling just sounds very traumatic of from what he says, his wife potentially trying to harm his kids. But then he gets hit with this misdemeanor animal cruelty charge, which I understand, like animal cruelty is a very, it's an important thing you have to prosecute, but to do it within 24 hours of all of this happening, what do you make of that decision by law enforcement?
Yeah, so I can understand at face value that does kind of strike somebody as that's a little odd that you would arrest a dad for a misdemeanor charge for animal cruelty when he just saved his children. So I get that. But if I'm putting myself in the lens of a cop or in law enforcement that went to that scene, I would venture to say that they looked at everything as a totality. So what does the conditions of the house look like? I'm sure that told a telling picture of how these kids were living. And so I think that based on all of that big picture, it was a way for them to also place the father in custody. And I'm sure they're still pending whether or not he's involved in the, child neglect or whatever issues that were going on at home with those kids. But I can't picture a law enforcement showing up to this house after him rescuing these kids. He had no involvement in that per se, and then arresting him for this cat. So I think clearly there's a lot more to this story that they're just not releasing at this time.
Because I understand, to your point, the story, I understand why someone would be charged with animal cruelty. This was an animal that was emaciated. There was a bowl with no food in it in a non-air conditioned locked area. But typically what type of discretion, what goes into the decision where I'm sure they investigate, it's a massive property. They investigated it. And I'm sure someone comes up and says to the detective, we found this cat. What is the conversation typically like when it goes to whether or not you're going to actually charge someone with, what do you get out of charging someone from that when it comes to holding them and how long they'd be able to be in custody?
Yeah, in my almost 20-year career, I've only arrested somebody for animal cruelty maybe a couple of times. And generally speaking, you're going to loop in animal control and they kind of run these investigations, or at least assist you in running these investigations. But yeah, essentially, I mean, I don't know, depending on the severity of the animal, in this case, we're talking about the cat. And a lot of cases, you'll take that animal or take those animals away from the home, put them in some type of animal shelter to rehabilitate them if they can, and then do a wraparound case, write it up, send it to the district attorney's office, have them review it and see if they're actually going to file criminal charges on the owners of these animals to see if they'll even want them placed into custody. But I have seen and heard of cases where people are arrested for animal cruelty. They do go to court. And then the ultimate goal would be they're not going to serve a lot of jail time, but I think the repercussions would be they're no longer allowed to own animals ever. And if they do, then they could be placed under arrest again. And so really, I think it's preventing people like that from even owning animals.
Yeah, because it's just fascinating with how mysterious all of this is. And then even you have law enforcement said it was bizarre and breathtaking, which I feel like when you have like a member of law enforcement just openly saying that, it just raises a lot of issues. And then a couple hours later, we have this unrelated, they were saying, animal cruelty charge. What stands out to you with, it doesn't seem like there's a Ring doorbell, I guess, but not a lot of surveillance cameras on the property. You get this story from the dad who calls 911. What do you do next in law enforcement to figure out what happened?
Well, are we talking about the animal, or are we talking about how do we move the kids?
Turning to the Nyquil, yeah. I mean, and it kind of speaks to how many layers there are in this. But I mean, going back to yesterday morning, the dad calls 911 and tells this story about his wife, but there's no surveillance cameras on the property. I mean, I guess, as law enforcement, how do you figure out what happened?
Yeah, you just got to kind of build your case from whatever evidence that you have. And if you don't have actual video footage of it, then, you have to, like I just said, you have to build on what evidence do you have. And in reading the article, it says the mom was still in the water. So the kids were on shore, they were wet. I mean, all of that plays a role. I would be curious to know what was the father's role in this. If he had no idea that this had occurred, he walks outside, he sees his kids in this body of water with his mother. There's a lot more to these investigations and pictures than what you're hearing on the media at face value. And so that is the role of law enforcement, is to go back and put all the puzzle pieces together and try to figure out what environment or type of environment are these kids living in. We've seen historically, if those types of calls get mistreated or neglected, then a lot of times these children do end up dead. And so those are very serious cases. And then, of course, you're going to loop in child protective services, and those kids are going to be removed from that home. And likely, they're not going to be issued back to those parents again. And if they do, the parents would have to go through some type of rehabilitation or do their time being incarcerated. And so it's just, those are lengthy investigations.
And it seems at this point, I know the two children who are in, one's only 6, but there's a 15-year-old, and they're planning to interview that 15-year-old who's in stable condition, who'll be able to talk about what happened. But in terms of eyewitnesses right now they've talked to, it appears the dad is the only person. So he's telling this story, and he's saying that this was not like a case of the kids just getting into the Nyquil and going out to the pond, that the mom, according to him, was deliberate in doing this. What is that interrogation like in figuring out, like having him walk through the morning and figure out whether or not he's telling the truth?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, talking with kids is tricky. And so you're talking the 15-year-old, an adult investigator can talk to her and get that side of the story. But as it relates to the younger children, we actually have to have people who are specially trained in interviewing children, because we know if you're a parent, if you feed a kid a story, they're going to run with that story, and they in their head are going to believe that that's what actually happened. And so you can't prompt kids with questions and answers. So there is actually a certain way to interview kids, and you do have to have people with special training to do that, and they will get the answer, and you'll be surprised what kids will tell you. So that'll be, I think, huge in this investigation. Otherwise, you're just taking the dad's word at face value.
And when you talk to the dad and you're trying to figure out who he is, like I thought it was interesting in the news conference, they said, because he owns this like $3 million house on this massive ranch in Texas, and the person speaking for the Liberty County Sheriff's Office says, apparently he sells cars, but we haven't been able to confirm that, which was like just an interesting thing to put out, which raises suspicion about just who this person is. When someone's telling this story about an event that seems like, hey, my wife did it, and he's been cooperative from what police have said to this point, how do you interrogate someone to know whether or not that story that they're telling is actually true?
Yeah, it's easy. Generally, you're just going to sit somebody down, have them answer your questions, and then you're just wanting to find out, is this person a truth teller or are they lying? But in order to do that, you have to have evidence to be able to back up that they are lying. And so you let them tell their story. You're going to have the evidence already that you're aware of, that you know for a fact. And then after they're done telling their story, you can go back and confront them with actual factual evidence that would prove otherwise, and then ask them how, can you explain that? And again, it just boils down to, can you determine whether or not someone is telling the truth or are they lying?
Yeah. Have you ever been in a situation where, how quickly, I guess in your career, can you tell when someone sitting across from you is telling the truth or not?
I think it's some people are better than others at lying, but generally speaking, when you confront somebody with something, you just reading their body language will tell you right off the bat whether or not they're lying. And I think oftentimes when people get the finger pointed at them or accused of something, your natural reaction is to want to lie and get out of it, right? Because you don't want to get in trouble. And so I think in this career, the longer you do it, the more you talk to people, it does become easier to judge whether or not somebody may be telling the truth or not. And so for me personally, it's just about reading body language. How nervous is somebody acting? If somebody's telling the truth and they genuinely did not do something, you can tell when they're just forthcoming about, they're adamant they didn't do it. They are willing to give you, I'll just use an example. Hey, look at my cell phone, read the text messages, check out my phone call record. I have nothing to hide, versus somebody who you're asking for their cooperation. They don't want to give you their phone. They don't want to give you your password. There's certain things you can do to kind of dictate whether or not this person's going to be cooperative with you. And little things like that will tell you a lot. And so really, that's just what it boils down to, is asking people hard questions and seeing what kind of response you're going to get out of that person.
And I know toxicology will be a big part of this, because there's the Nyquil aspect of it, which I know law enforcement was still kind of hesitant to confirm that part where it was specifically Nyquil. What's the process of actually, you'll have this 15-year-old kid, he's still a minor. How do you go about actually getting that toxicology test? And not just the 15-year-old, all the people who are involved in this.
Yeah, so you're going to we'll take their blood at the hospital or wherever, and then I'm sure they took the mother's blood, and maybe they took the father's blood. But if you're talking about an adult, if depending on what state you're in, if they deny that, then you're going to have to get a warrant to be able to get their blood, and so there would be certain things in place to do that. And then obviously, when they submit that, they're going to have to test specifically for the contents of the Nyquil.
And then I just think of like the days that it could take to do this. At the time of this recording, the mom is still in, last time I checked, critical condition, and one other kid is in critical condition. Compared to, I think in some cases, and if this was a suicide attempt in some ways, you kind of have all the information in one spot. Like, how long does, with what we know at this point, which isn't a lot, could it take to actually build a case? I guess, how complicated does this one seem is what I'm trying to ask, compared to, an unfortunate, if it was a murder-suicide, you kind of understand what happened in some cases.
Yeah, honestly, not long. You can rush toxicology reports, you can have all that stuff in place. The investigators probably already know what occurred that night or day. So really it's just about getting all of your factual evidence, putting that together. But in a case like this, not long. And usually law enforcement has the answers. They're just not going to release that to the media because, quite frankly, we don't want certain information out there to the media that we are already aware of for various different reasons. But yeah, for the most part, we know what happened. It's just, we're just not going to project that we know what happened.
And if they charged him with this animal cruelty more as just kind of, let's get something on the books to hold him in place, and maybe there's much more to this story than we realize. If that's actually what they're doing, and I know his bond was set at like $5,000, which maybe he's able to post that. If it's, I guess, what do you get out of that in terms of just specifically like trying to hold someone for, he was in jail overnight, but with the amount of money they have for this home, I don't know his financial situation, but he could be able to be out pretty quickly if it's just a $5,000 bond. Like, what's the win for law enforcement when you just hit someone with maybe a minor charge just to get something on the books?
Yeah, it could just be something to use as leverage, right? Like maybe they need fingerprints, maybe they need his DNA. Maybe there's things that maybe it's time. Maybe they needed a little bit of time to figure something out. But for sure, and just reading that this guy was arrested for that misdemeanor charge, clearly law enforcement was wanting to use something as leverage to their benefit to have him booked in jail. There's a whole list of things that it could be, but I don't think it's just, we're going to book this guy for misdemeanor animal cruelty just because of that. I think there's obviously more to that, but yeah, when you are booked in jail, there are things that do occur that we gain from you that maybe that's what they needed to bolster their case. And so to me, it's just a leverage situation.
Yeah, and it was, I wasn't expecting it last night when I saw that was the arrest and what it was for. It's just, and to use police's words, it's just a bizarre case where everybody's trying to figure out what happened. Kyle Schoberg, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.